Okay. So, cool. Waiting for Instagram to be the most live. Currently, I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So we'll see how many people are able to hopefully benefit from this. So, got my notes here. Today, we're going to talk about your eyes. I don't know if you can tell. I woke up at 3:30 this morning. My wife was like boxing or something, so she punched my back a couple of times, not violently, just like moving pillows and stuff, and I just couldn't fall back asleep. So I was up at 3:30, so you might see my eyes are a little bit funny today. But we're going to talk about your eyes in terms of concussion, in terms of kind of overall neurological, overall brain health. So why your eyes are so important. And we're also going to talk about, because on TikTok in particular, but also on Instagram, I've got people who I'll post a little blurb of like, I've got an optokinetic strip, which is a little red and white stripe. Bring some of my tools over here. So I've got an optokinetic strip. I've got people mad at me about this as if I use this in isolation. I've got people mad about the convergence rule as if I use that in isolation. And so I kind of want to bring it all together to talk about how, how a functional exam builds upon a standard of care exam. It's not one or the other. It's not this tool versus that tool. It's using the standard and then building on that. And so we'll talk about that. So basically, why are we talking about the eyes in concussion? We're talking about the eyes in brain health, and concussion being a subset of brain health, because your eyes are a literal extension of your brain. Your eyes are literally an extension of your brain. And because of that, they're a figurative window into the brain and into neurological function. We know that more than 50% of the known pathways, like more than 50% of your brain, is devoted to vision and eye movements. So if we've got a problem out here in your vision or your eye movements, we can trace it pretty well back to some region of your brain and leverage that for rehab. So basically what I've got some notes here, specific abnormalities kind of outside will tell us about kind of what and where when we're looking at what's going on in the brain. And an oculomotor exam tells you a lot more than just what's going on with the extraocular muscles around the eye and the cranial nerves kind of working on those. It tells you about the pathways converging on those cranial nerves, and the direction of the eyes tells you what's happening in a particular direction, tells you about what's going on in different areas of the brain. So how does the brain hold so many visual pathways? When you're looking at just the ability to recognize patterns, to recognize shapes, to recognize that the sweater is black, that the wall is blue, that the poster is red, that vision travels to the occipital lobe and then spreads to the parietal and temporal lobes. So you already got 3 lobes of your brain involved in just seeing color and just seeing shapes. When you're looking at ocular motor movements, when you're looking at how your eyes move side to side, how they jump from targets, that involves your frontal lobes, your parietal lobes, your cerebellum, your midbrain, your pons, your vestibular system. It involves all these different networks in the brain. And so that's kind of why examining your brain is so important, or examining your eyes is so important in examining your brain. Pardon me, I did wake up at 3:30. So jumping into that, like, what are the exams we use in concussion? The exams we use in concussion, again, TikTok has been particularly hard on me about this, because I guess looking at a video in isolation, people assume that I don't use other tools. They assume that all I do in practice is what that one video shows. So we're going to talk about functional neurology versus standard of care, and how functional neurology just kind of builds on the standard of care. So why we're evaluating the eyes in concussion is that we know that across TBI in general, so mild, moderate, and severe TBI, more than 90% of people are going to have an oculomotor dysfunction. And within concussion, it's about 70% of people or more are going to have an oculomotor dysfunction, particularly in saccades, so in fast jumping eye movements. So if I was going to jump from this finger to this finger, just moving my eyes, that fast movement is a saccade. There's problems with saccades, there's problems with convergence, there's problems with accommodation. And And so we see that in concussion, we see that in TBI, and part of the reason we're assessing for that is to see, like, are you ready to return to sport, return to life, and can we get rid of your symptoms? Because problems with vision and vestibular function is going to mess with headaches, it's going to mess with brain fog, it's going to mess with fatigue, it's going to mess with all this stuff. So the two kind of big standard of care tests within concussion are going to be the King-Devick test and then the VOMS assessment, or the vestibular oculomotor screening assessment. So King-Devick is basically this kind of way you're measuring saccades and visual processing. And it's basically you're reading numbers back and forth. So they're kind of zigzagged across the page, and they're staggered at different lengths, and there's kind of different densities of numbers. And so you're just like 1, 3, 4, 6, whatever. And you're doing it as fast as you can. And what we see is from when we're doing baseline assessments in athletes, from baseline post-concussion, we'll see that the time it takes you to read that King-Devick sheet drops by about 7 seconds. And so for most people, if you're 14 or older, it shouldn't take you longer than a minute, and you probably shouldn't make more than like one mistake. But when you're jumping back and forth between these numbers, after a concussion, you drop by about 7 seconds. So King-Devick really tells us about time. And used alone, King-Devick is kind of a sideline assessment. It's not the only assessment. So King-Devick by itself is not 100% accurate at diagnosing concussion. But when you pair King-Devick, neurocognitive assessment, so the SAC, and balance error scoring, you can diagnose like 100% of concussions. So if there's a deficit on the King-Devick, if there's a deficit in neurocognitive function, and there's a deficit in balance, almost 100% guarantee that that person had a concussion. So King-Devick, yeah, again, when combined, King-Devick deficits, so the oculomotor deficits, part of the reason we assess it is because the King-Devick deficits can last longer than your symptoms. So what that means is you'll feel better, like Patrick Mahomes felt better. We don't know what his King-Devick scores were. He probably, I'm assuming if they allowed him to play, he passed his tests. But if you're feeling better, you're like, I'm ready to play, but we want an objective way to say, like, are you actually ready to play? Is your visual processing up to speed? Can your eyes move quick enough to play and move throughout the world? King-Devick is a cool way to use it, so we can use it as a return to play option as well. The other thing that I mentioned was the VOMS, the vestibular oculomotor screen. And this is another one that is really good, like 90% accurate at ruling out a concussion. So if you can go through the VOMS assessment and not have a provocation of symptoms, so your symptoms don't flare during a VOMS assessment, then you probably 90% chance you don't have a concussion. If your symptoms do flare during a VOMS assessment, it's like flipping a coin. You might have a concussion, you might not. We've got to look at a lot of other stuff. So King-Devick is really about time. VOMS is really about symptoms. And the VOMS assessment, we're looking at pursuits. So your ability to follow a target smoothly. So if I'm watching my finger, my ability to follow that target smoothly is a pursuit. A saccade, I already talked about, is kind of jumping, fast eye movements, jumping between. So we look at pursuits, we look at saccades, we look at pursuits vertically, horizontally, saccades, horizontally, vertically. And then we also look at your VOR, so your vestibular ocular reflex. So the reflex of your ears telling you kind of where you are in space, your vestibular system through here. Your ears telling you where you are in space to move your eyes kind of opposite the way your head is moving so that you can keep your eyes on a target. And this reflex is actually what keeps the world from looking like the Blair Witch Project and kind of bouncing as we move through the world. So you kind of hold on a target, and can I stay on my thumb while my head moves? And that's our VOR. And we'll see a lot of times that makes people foggy, nauseous. It gives them headaches. It makes people really dizzy after concussion. The other one we'll test is your ability to kind of suppress all of that. You've got a reflex, an optokinetic reflex, where if like if anyone who has concussion is watching, this might make you dizzy right now. But there's a reflex where your eyes will kind of follow the stripes. And then you've got the vestibular ocular reflex where you'll kind of stay on a target. We're looking at your ability to suppress that, to suppress your eyes from moving and staying on a target as we move, and that will tell us about visual motion sensitivity. But again, all these are oculomotor assessments. So we're looking at the VOMS looks at pursuits, saccades, VOR, visual motion sensitivity, which we just talked about. It looks at your ability to converge, so your eyes' ability to come together, and then your ability to accommodate, so your ability to adjust to one eye adjusting to something moving in closer to you, How close can an object get before it gets blurry, and your ability to kind of constrict and dilate, allowing light in. So all those two assessments are really just built around, are we assessing vision and can we assess vision and oculomotor function to diagnose and to look at outcomes in concussion? And yes, we can. Those are two really validated tools. But I'm going to talk about my problems with those and how I use those as a standard of care and differently in my practice. So within the functional care, all those exams are validated, which simply means we know they're really relevant in concussion. We know we've got studies that say, hey, the King-Devick, when used, can rule, used by itself, I think it's about 50% in diagnosing concussion. But used in conjunction, it's validated to really diagnose concussion. It's validated for return to play, different things like that. But King-Devick tells me that there's a time problem, and that's about it. It just says, hey, there's visual processing issues. We're looking at saccades. There's a time issue, but that's about it. The VOMS assessment tells me there's an oculomotor pursuit or a vestibular dysfunction that provokes symptoms, and that's about it. And I'm not saying those are bad things, right? Those are really good things. We need to know that. But neither of those tests tell me what is happening or why, if that makes sense. So are you foggy and struggling to pursue because your eyes can't even stay on a target in the first place? Like if I held my thumb over here, would your eyes jump and tick and have nystagmus? Like, is that why the pursuit makes you feel funny? Are you foggy and struggling with pursuits because of the vestibular dysfunction? Is it actually a vestibular dysfunction, or is it because of optokinetic contamination? Does a VOR make you nauseous going to the left or the right or both? Because we're testing bilaterally, but it doesn't, maybe you're only getting dizzy because you've got a problem rotating this way, not the other way. So those are kind of like very vague general things, but it's big picture. King-Devick told me about time, and the VOMS told me about symptoms, but it didn't tell me why or what. It didn't tell me left-sided versus right-sided. It didn't tell me which part you were struggling with. We'll see, you can actually track with video nystagmography, with right eye vision tracking. You can track your eyes, and we'll see in pursuits, people have downward intrusions or upward intrusions, or they'll jump ahead and catch up back. And there's often patterns to it where it's like people who jump down only jump down. And we find that correlates with vestibular function. And we'll see that as they stand, they want to fall back into the left. Well, when your eyes move back as a part of the vestibulo-ocular reflex, your eyes move down, right? I got to stay on the target. So if I'm pursuing something and I've got this spontaneous kind of vestibular dysfunction back here, just kind of a discharge every now and then, my eyes are going to move down. I wouldn't know that if I didn't look for it. If I was only looking at the VOMS and said, hey, did your symptoms flare? Cool. But what am I going to do about it? So a really bad analogy here. I ran this by my wife this morning, and she was like, you're crazy. So the bad analogy here is, let's look at a 100-meter sprint. So 100-meter sprint is kind of running speed. It tests running speed, sort of like the King-Devick tells me about visual processing speed. Usain Bolt, let's bring Usain Bolt into this. He can run 100 meters in under 10 seconds, right? That's fast. Let's say he gets injured, right? Let's say he had a concussion, or let's say he got injured for some reason, and he runs at 34 seconds. 100 meters in 34 seconds is slow. So just like the King-Devick, we saw that his running time slowed down, maybe his King-Devick slowed down, right? We're kind of crossing this analogy here. So the time is slow, but if all we have is the time, what do we do about it? We just know that he's slow. Was he crawling on his knees? Is there a problem with his running mechanics? We don't know. We just know his time is messed up. So let's put him on the treadmill. Let's do the equivalent of a VOMS. Let's put him on a treadmill and make him do different things with his legs. And we find we don't pay attention to the little details. We just put him through different tests, and we say, hey, did something happen? And he goes, yeah, on these exercises, my knees hurt and I slow down. Cool. So we just expose him. Now, if we were running a standard of care therapy, we would run the King-Devick, we'd run the VOMS, we would find which symptoms were provoked on the VOMS, and then we would expose you to those symptoms. So really, it'd be like Usain Bolt has a slow running time, a slow King-Devick. We put him on a treadmill, and in a certain position on the treadmill, he gets symptoms like a VOMS pursuit. And so we just make him do that over and over again. We don't know why he's having the knee pain or why he's slowing down, right? King-Devick looks at time. A sprint looks at time. We didn't look at the why. I hope that analogy got terrible, but I hope that made sense, right? So we just found out Usain Bolt was slow. His knees hurt. We still don't know why. Is he going valgus on both sides? Is he going valgus on one side? Does he have a weird toe off? Why is he slow? So functional neurology care is kind of, we'll do the King-Devick, we'll do the VOMS assessment, but we're going to look at what is happening with your eyes during the pursuit. Oh, that raised your symptoms? Cool. We only looked at horizontally. We only looked at vertically. What about in the diagonal plane? That kind of correlates with some cerebellar stuff. So we can get really specific with that. So functional neurological care does not neglect standard of care, but it builds upon those exams. So we've got this validated kind of cookie cutter test that says, hey, we can rule in a concussion. Cool. We've got this other validated test that says, hey, we can provoke symptoms with a particular mechanism. Cool. Functional, kind of the functional layer that I'll layer in, particularly with patients in office, because virtually we've got to have, there's less I can do. I can do about 85% of a neurological exam virtually that I can do in office. But in office, then, if we've got the King-Devick, the VOMS, the whatever provoking symptoms, we're going to look at why. And rather than a cookie cutter, I'm going to send you home with a VOR target, and I'm going to have you go this way and then this way. I might have you go just this way. Or I might have you go follow with your nose, keep your eyes put, bring your nose back. We might do different things to kind of tease the vestibular system in a very particular way, so that then we go run the VOMS again, or we go to run the King-Devick again, and you're faster and you're not as provoked with symptoms, because rather than giving you this cookie cutter, well, the VOR provoked your symptoms, so let's just make you do the VOR until you don't get sick anymore. That doesn't make sense. Let's find why you're getting sick in the first place. Let's find why you're getting nauseous. Let's find why you're getting dizzy, and let's build on that. Let's see if it's just a left-sided issue or just a right-sided issue. So again, like I said, my virtual patients, I saw one of my virtual patients log on here. They're getting cookie cutters because I can't tap reflexes. I can't see optokinetic responses. I can't see some of the details that I would in office. But I kind of wanted to wrap this up here saying, this is why your eyes are so important. Your eyes make up, your vision and eye movements make up more than 50% of the pathways that we know in the brain. We know more about how your cerebellum controls your eyes than we do about how your cerebellum controls your legs. That's pretty fantastic. That's amazing. So when we use an oculomotor assessment, we're getting a good idea of what's going on in the cerebellum. We're getting a good idea with saccades of what's going on in the frontal lobe. We're getting a good idea of what's going on in the brainstem if it's a reflexive saccade. There's a lot of really cool stuff that we can glean from the eyes, and that's why we use it in concussion. And we know that after concussion, 70% or more of people are dealing with an oculomotor dysfunction. So we use validated tests like the King-Devick. If you're a patient of mine, whether you're virtual or in person, I have folks use the EQ app. Sort of the modified King-Devick, the gamified King-Devick is the dance-off game in the EQ app. And that's where you're swiping arrows, and we're seeing how you can visually process different spaced arrows, kind of left to right, top to bottom. And your time on that is kind of it's the equivalent of the King-Devick for a virtual tracking app. So we use the King-Devick, we use the VOMS. The VOMS is something I can do virtually. I have patients, rather than a convergence rule, have them put a ruler on their head, and they got to drag their thumb back. So there's ways we can check convergence insufficiency, accommodation insufficiency. We can check your vestibular ocular function. But again, what's really cool is that I don't think I've talked about, but I wanted to talk about is it's not just what's going on with your eyes. Your eyes tell you about where you're at in space. They tell you about where you're at in the world, kind of where you're moving. And so if something's wonky with your eyes, we'll also see that show up when I tap reflexes, when I have you stand with your eyes closed. Again, if your eyes are pursuing and shooting down, as you're only moving to the left, and it doesn't happen when you're moving to the right, I'm going to have you stand, and we might find that you sway back into the right. We might find that when I have you turn your head this way, it changes versus when I turn your head this way, because it all matters. Your body's trying to keep the horizon neutral, trying to keep you upright and the heart pumping. And if something has changed that, and it could be oculomotor function, we're going to see everything change. There's going to be a change in kind of the total phenomenology of your body. And that is why the eyes are so freaking cool. And that's why functional neurologists spend so much time looking at the eyes. That's why they've got fancy equipment like vision tracking, VNG, video nystagmography, all kinds of different tools, because there's redundancy in the body to keep us alive and to keep us upright and to keep us moving, and concussion messes that up. And we can see that a lot in the eyes. So I hope you didn't mind my lack of sleep ramble talking about the eyes. Thank you all for being here. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to try to post this afterwards. Go ahead and leave them in the comments. And I will see you all later. So again, I guess my theme from last week, my theme from this week, if your doctor's not running these tests, if you've never heard of a King Devick, or your doctor hasn't run a VOMS assessment on you and you've had a concussion, if they said your CT was clean, and to just wait until your symptoms go away, they're missing a huge boat here in terms of concussion care. So the eyes, really important. Have your doctor check them out. There are validated tests, and then beyond the validated tests, we can get really awesome. We can get really cool therapies, really specific therapies, specific to your exam results, not just whether the symptoms were provoked or not. So thank you for joining. I will chat with you guys in the comments and keep posting throughout the week, and see you guys here again next week for a new topic. Cool. Thank you, TikTok. I don't know how to